The rain poured relentlessly, soaking through Harold's thin coat as he stood outside the massive iron gates of the mansion that used to feel like his own. The cold drops rolled down his cheeks, mingling with the tears he tried so hard to hide. It wasn't his name on the deed anymore, nor his laughter echoing through the halls. His children, his own flesh and blood, now controlled everything, from the grand estate to the overflowing bank accounts. The inheritance from his late wife's estate had settled only months before, distributing $64 million. A sum so large, it should have secured generations of comfort. Harold believed it would bring the family closer, a chance to celebrate life together after mourning the loss of the woman who had bound them. But instead, the money became a poison, slowly seeping into every corner of their hearts. At first, Harold thought it was just grief making them distant. His eldest, Thomas, stopped visiting as often, always claiming to be too busy managing investments. His daughter, Claire, filled her days with shopping trips, designer clothes, and friends who had suddenly appeared the moment they learned of her wealth. Even his youngest, Andrew, who once clung to Harold for advice and comfort, now brushed him aside, preferring the shallow applause of strangers at loud, extravagant parties. Harold waited patiently, reminding himself they were still young and overwhelmed by such sudden riches. But then came the words that cut him deeper than any blade. One evening, when he tried to sit them down for a family dinner, something his late wife had always insisted on, Thomas scoffed, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "You've had your life, Dad. It's our turn now. You don't need to tell us what to do anymore." The others nodded in agreement, their eyes gleaming with arrogance. Harold's fork froze mid-air. His heart pounded. He wanted to argue, to remind them of the sacrifices he had made, of the nights he worked 2 jobs just to put food on the table, of the years he denied himself every luxury so they could attend the best schools. But no words came. They looked at him not as a father, but as an obstacle. The final blow came days later. They sold his house, his home, the place he and his wife had built with their own hands. When Harold protested, Claire dismissed him with a cold wave of her hand. "We'll give you a check, Dad. You'll be fine. Don't make this harder than it is." And just like that, decades of love and devotion were reduced to a thin slip of paper. That night, Harold found himself outside in the pouring rain, his suitcase at his feet, watching as the gates closed with a heavy metallic clang. From within, the sounds of laughter and music spilled into the night, his children celebrating, drinking, living without a care in the world. Harold stood there for a long time, the rain soaking through his clothes until his body shivered uncontrollably. He had never felt so abandoned, so utterly unwanted. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just alone, he was invisible. Months passed, and Harold's life transformed in ways his children could never have imagined. The check they had shoved into his hand barely covered a few weeks of expenses, yet Harold stretched every cent with the same resourcefulness that had carried him through his working years. He found temporary lodging in a modest room above a local community center, where he exchanged light maintenance work for shelter. The bed was thin, the walls cracked, but the kindness he found there filled the emptiness his mansion could never have. At first, Harold felt broken, moving through his days like a ghost. The betrayal of his children weighed heavily on him, and there were nights he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying their words. "You've had your life, Dad. It's our turn now." He wondered if perhaps he had failed them, if all the lessons he thought he had taught about integrity, family, and love had simply evaporated the moment money entered the picture. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, his wounds began to heal. The center's director, a kind woman named Margaret, noticed Harold's diligence and offered him a small paid position managing incoming donations. Sorting through boxes of food, clothing, and books gave Harold a sense of purpose. Soon, he became a fixture in the building, known to everyone for his steady hands, his patient ear, and the warmth that radiated from his quiet presence. Harold discovered something profound. Without the burden of toxic expectations and the corrosive influence of wealth, he could finally live for himself. He taught woodworking to neighborhood kids using scraps of timber donated by local businesses. He showed them how to carve, sand, and polish, not just to create toys and small furniture, but to build patience, pride, and focus. The laughter of those children filled a void his own children had left. They looked at him with admiration, calling him Mr. Harold, or Grandpa H, and for the first time in a long while, he felt needed. Word of his kindness spread throughout the community. Parents began seeking his advice, Neighbors dropped by to share stories, and people who had once overlooked him now regarded him as a pillar of quiet strength. Harold realized he had gained something his children had lost: respect, earned not through wealth, but through character. Meanwhile, far away in their crumbling mansion, his children's gilded world began to crack. At first, it was subtle: overspending on luxury cars, hiring staff to maintain an extravagant lifestyle, investing in shallow business ventures that promised quick returns. But as months went on, the millions bled away faster than they could comprehend. Thomas's brilliant investments collapsed. Claire's endless shopping sprees left her drowning in debt. Andrew's wild parties destroyed his reputation, leaving him blacklisted from even his wealthiest friends' circles. Their social circles evaporated just as quickly as they had appeared. The so-called friends who had once toasted with them in champagne-filled glasses now vanished, answering no calls, sending no replies. The siblings, who had once basked in arrogance, began pointing fingers at one another, blaming, fighting, unraveling. By the time the bank repossessed their cars and creditors came knocking at their mansion door, the siblings realized the horrifying truth: they had squandered nearly everything. The millions were gone, and with it, so was the illusion of their independence. But while their world collapsed, Harold's life blossomed with a richness money could never buy. One cold evening, as rain drummed steadily against the roof of the community center, Harold was finishing up the day's work. He had just finished locking the donation room when he heard a hesitant knock on the front door. At first, he assumed it was a passerby seeking shelter from the storm. But when he opened it, his heart nearly stopped. There, drenched and shivering, stood his children. Thomas, Claire, and Andrew, once proud, polished heirs in tailored suits and designer dresses, now looked like shadows of themselves. Their clothes, though once expensive, were frayed and worn. Their faces carried lines of stress far beyond their years, and their eyes, those same eyes that had once looked at him with defiance, now brimmed with shame and desperation. "Dad," Claire whispered, her voice trembling under the weight of exhaustion, we don't have anywhere else to go." For a long, heavy moment, Harold simply stared. His mind replayed the memory of himself standing in the rain months earlier, locked out of his own home, abandoned by the very people now begging for entry. He could almost hear Thomas's cold words echoing, "You've had your life, Dad. It's our turn now." How easily they had cast him aside. How cruelly they had laughed and lived while he shivered alone in the storm. Resentment burned in his chest, rising like a wave. He wanted to tell them to leave, to taste the same bitter abandonment they had forced upon him. And yet, as he looked deeper into their faces, he saw not arrogance, not greed, but fragility. They were no longer the untouchable heirs who had reveled in wealth. They were broken, scared, and lost. For the first time in a long while, they looked like his children again. Harold's heart softened. The years of fatherhood, the nights spent rocking them to sleep, the sacrifices, the lessons, the endless love, outweighed the months of betrayal. With a steady breath, he stepped aside. "You can come in," he said quietly. They shuffled past him, dripping water onto the floor. Inside the warm community hall, the siblings collapsed onto wooden benches, their pride stripped away. Andrew buried his face in his hands, sobbing softly. Claire leaned against her father's shoulder, too tired to maintain her facade. Thomas, once the most defiant, stared blankly at the floor, unable to meet Harold's eyes. "You need to understand something," Harold began, his voice firm but calm. "Money doesn't bind us. Respect does. Family does. If you're here, it's not for comfort, it's to learn what that truly means." The silence that followed was heavy but different, no longer defiant, but contemplative. The children, once so sure of their superiority, now listened like students desperate for guidance. That night, as the rain tapped gently against the windows, Harold sat with them, offering bread and soup from the center's kitchen. They ate quietly, humbled by the simplicity. It wasn't forgiveness yet, his heart still bore scars, but it was a beginning. For the first time in months, father and children shared a table again, not as heirs and outcast, but as a family piecing itself back together. Harold realized something profound as he watched his children huddle close in the dim light. The $64 million had ruined them, but hardship had brought them back. And though he could not rewrite what had been done, he had been given a chance to remind them of love, humility, and second chances. The truest fortune, Harold thought with quiet certainty, had never been the money. It was this, the chance to reclaim what greed had stolen, his family.